The shutter clicked at precisely 11:30 on that crisp October morning in 1873, capturing what would become the most haunting photograph in railway history. Edmund Harwick lowered his camera from the wooden tripod, his breath forming small clouds in the autumn air as he surveyed the bustling scene at Millbrook Station's Platform 2. The morning light filtered through the iron and glass canopy above, casting long shadows across the weathered stone platform where a dozen passengers waited for the London Express. Harwick checked his gold pocket watch one final time, confirming the accuracy of his timing. 11:30 exactly. He prided himself on precision. It was what made him one of Northern England's most sought-after railway photographers. The Great Northern Railway Company had commissioned him to document their newest station, and he intended to deliver images that would showcase both the grandeur of their architecture and the vitality of their service. "Magnificent shot, I'd wager," called out Thomas Grimsby, the station master, as he approached with his characteristic brisk stride. His brass buttons gleamed against his dark blue uniform, and his weathered face bore the confident expression of a man who had orchestrated countless arrivals and departures without incident. "The morning light catches the ironwork beautifully at this hour." Harwick nodded, carefully packing his photographic plates into their protective case. "Indeed, Mr. Grimsby? The passengers provide an excellent sense of scale against your impressive station clock." He gestured toward the ornate timepiece that dominated the platform's far end, its Roman numerals clearly visible beneath the peaked roof that sheltered it from the elements. The clock had been Millbrook Station's crown jewel since its installation 3 months prior, a masterwork of German engineering that chimed the quarter hours with bell-like precision. Its brass pendulum caught the light as it swung steadily back and forth, marking the passage of time with mechanical certainty. The railway company had spared no expense in its construction, importing the finest craftsmen from the Black Forest to ensure its accuracy. "Keeps perfect time, that one does," Grimsby declared with evident pride. "Haven't lost a second since we set her running. The passengers appreciate knowing they can trust our schedules." He pulled out his own timepiece, a silver watch that had belonged to his father before him. 11:32 now, right on the mark. As if summoned by their conversation, the distant whistle of the approaching express echoed across the Yorkshire countryside. The waiting passengers began to stir, gathering their belongings and moving closer to the platform's edge. Harwick observed them with a photographer's eye, noting the way the morning light played across their faces, the elderly gentleman in the silk top hat consulting his newspaper, the young clerk clutching his leather satchel, the mother shepherding her small son away from the platform's edge. The locomotive rounded the bend with impressive majesty, its black iron bulk gleaming in the sunlight as steam billowed from its stack. The engineer's whistle sounded twice in greeting, and Grimsby raised his hand in acknowledgement. Everything proceeded exactly as it should on any ordinary Tuesday morning at Millbrook Station. It was only later, when Harwick developed the photograph in his darkroom that evening, that the impossible revelation emerged. The image was technically perfect, crisp detail, excellent contrast, every face clearly defined. But there, in the background, the station clock's hands pointed unmistakably to 13 minutes past 13, an hour that could not exist, captured in permanent silver and chemicals. Harwick stared at the photograph until his eyes watered, then checked it again under his strongest magnifying glass. There could be no mistake. The clock showed 13:13, while his notes clearly recorded the shot at 11:30, confirmed by his pocket watch and corroborated by Grimsby's timepiece. Within a week, the first death occurred. Thomas Grimsby collapsed at his post the following Tuesday, his heart simply stopping as he raised his flag to signal the London Express. The doctor could find no cause. The man had been in perfect health, with no history of heart trouble. The young clerk from the photograph followed 2 weeks later, struck by a runaway cart as he crossed the station approach. Then the elderly gentleman, found dead in his study with his newspaper still folded to the railway timetables. One by one, every soul visible in that impossible photograph met their end, until only Edmund Harwick remained. He had shown the image to Dr. Cornelius Ashford of the Royal Institute of Chronometry, hoping for a rational explanation. But Ashford's examination had only deepened the mystery. "This is an affront to natural law," the distinguished chronometer declared, his white whiskers trembling with agitation. "No mechanical timepiece can display such an hour, yet the image is genuine. There are no signs of manipulation or double exposure. It defies every principle of temporal measurement." The railway authorities moved swiftly once the pattern became undeniable. They sealed the station records, forbade any discussion of the photograph, and transferred the remaining staff to distant postings. But whispers persisted among the railway workers, growing into a legend that spread along the iron tracks like smoke from a distant fire. As winter descended upon Millbrook Station, the locals began to speak in hushed tones of that October morning when time itself had gone mad. They remembered the clicking of Harwick's camera, the confident smile of Thomas Grimsby, and the steady tick of the station clock that should never have struck 13. The clock struck 13 that day, and 13 souls paid the price. The morning fog clung to the rails like ghostly fingers as Thomas Harwick adjusted his camera equipment on the platform of Millbrook Station. October had settled over Northumberland with an unusual heaviness, and the autumn of 1873 promised to be one of the most significant in Britain's railway expansion. Steam engines now connected the remotest villages to bustling industrial centers, their iron arteries pumping life into communities that had once existed in isolation. Millbrook Station, modest though it was with its two weathered platforms and simple brick waiting room, served as a vital link to the coal mines that blackened the surrounding countryside with their productive smoke. Harwick wiped the condensation from his lens with practiced precision. Photography remained a delicate art in these times, requiring the wet plate collodion process that demanded exact timing and unwavering steadiness of hand. Each photograph was a gamble against time itself, the chemical plates refusing to wait for hesitation or second thoughts. The hundreds of miners who passed through these platforms daily barely glanced at his unusual equipment, their minds focused on the grueling shifts that awaited them in the depths below ground. Station Master William Caldwell emerged from his office, leather-bound ledger tucked firmly under his arm. His morning routine never varied. Arrive at dawn, inspect the platforms, record the scheduled arrivals and departures in his meticulous handwriting. But on this particular October 15th, something felt different. The air itself seemed to shimmer with an energy he couldn't name, and the familiar sounds of the station echoed with strange distortions. "Morning, Mr. Harwick," Caldwell called out, his breath forming small clouds in the crisp air. "Another day, documenting our little corner of progress, I see." Harwick nodded, but his attention was drawn to the station master's peculiar expression. Caldwell stared at his pocket watch with growing confusion, shaking it gently as if the mechanism had betrayed him. The morning train from Newcastle was due at precisely 9:15, yet the timepiece showed an impossible reading. "Strangest thing," Caldwell muttered, opening his ledger to make the day's first entry. His pen hovered over the page as he checked his watch again. The chronometer reads 13:13, but the sun's position suggests it's barely past 9 in the morning. The distant whistle of an approaching locomotive cut through their bewilderment. Both men turned toward the sound, but what they witnessed defied all logic. The morning train materialized through the fog not from the expected eastern approach, but from the western track, a direction that led only to abandoned mining shafts and overgrown meadows. Passengers disembarked with expressions of deep confusion. Miners who should have been deep underground emerged from carriages, their faces pale and their movements uncertain. Some checked pocket watches that displayed readings identical to Caldwell's impossible 13:13. Others seemed to be searching for something they couldn't name, their eyes scanning the platform with growing anxiety. "I left home just moments ago," one bewildered miner told his companion. "But Mary insists I've been gone since yesterday evening." She showed me the cold supper still sitting on the table, untouched. Dr. Margaret Thornfield, who had been waiting for the morning train to carry her to patients in the neighboring village, approached the confused passengers with professional concern. Her medical bag in hand, she began observing symptoms that challenged every principle of her training. The miners spoke of conversations they claimed hadn't yet occurred, described events that seemed to exist in some impossible future. "You mentioned your brother's accident," one miner said to another, "but James is perfectly well. He's working the morning shift as usual." The second miner stared back with haunted eyes. "But I saw it happen. The cave-in, the rescue, everything. You told me about it not an hour ago." Dr. Thornfield made careful notes in her journal, documenting what she could only describe as temporal displacement symptoms. Her rational mind rejected the evidence before her, yet her professional training demanded accurate observation. These men exhibited none of the usual signs of confusion or delirium, yet they spoke of impossibilities as if they were simple facts. Caldwell's hands trembled slightly as he recorded the arrival time in his ledger. The figures seemed to mock him. 13:13. Minutes later, as another train appeared through the same inexplicable western approach, he found himself writing 13:27. The mathematical impossibility of time moving backward and forward simultaneously challenged his orderly world. Throughout that strange autumn, similar incidents multiplied with disturbing frequency. The parish registers at St. Bartholomew's Church began displaying equally impossible entries. Father Benedict found himself recording baptisms and burials with timestamps that defied chronological order. October 20th appeared before October 19th in his careful records, and November 1st somehow preceded October 30th in a way that made his head ache when he tried to comprehend it. Railway employees began arriving home hours before their shifts had ended, carrying memories of conversations that their families insisted had never taken place. Some spoke of meeting versions of themselves on the platforms, brief encounters with figures who looked identical, but wore expressions of different experiences entirely. The British Railway Commission received increasingly frantic reports from Millbrook Station, each document adding to a growing file of inexplicable incidents. Senior officials exchanged worried correspondence, their usual bureaucratic language strained by the impossibility of what they were attempting to document. Technical explanations were proposed and immediately discarded. Weather patterns, magnetic anomalies, equipment malfunctions, none could account for the systematic disruption occurring along the Millbrook line. By November, the Commission had dispatched investigators who returned with reports that defied filing in any conventional category. Their sealed memorandum, marked with the highest level of confidentiality, acknowledged chronological irregularities, without offering even the pretense of scientific explanation. The investigators themselves seemed shaken by their experiences, several requesting immediate transfers to distant stations. Dr. Thornfield continued her documentation with scientific rigor, even as the evidence accumulated beyond rational explanation. Her sealed journal entries, later stored in the Millbrook Historical Society archives, painted a picture of a community grappling with the fundamental nature of time itself. Workers described arriving at destinations before their journeys had begun, meeting people who referenced conversations that belonged to tomorrow or yesterday in ways that scrambled conventional understanding. The autumn deepened, and with it came a growing sense that Millbrook Station had become the epicenter of something unprecedented. The fog seemed denser here, the shadows fell differently, and the sound of approaching trains carried echoes that seemed to arrive from impossible directions. Local residents began avoiding the station when possible, taking longer routes to their destinations rather than risk exposure to whatever force was bending reality around the railway platforms. As November gave way to December, one phrase appeared repeatedly in the scattered documentation of those extraordinary months. Railway workers, medical professionals, church officials, and government investigators all seemed to reach the same inexplicable conclusion about their experiences at Millbrook Station. Time itself seemed to have developed a stutter along the Millbrook line. The morning fog of October 3, 1873, rolled across Millbrook Station like a living thing, thick and unnatural in its persistence. William Graves stood on the platform, his porter's cap damp with moisture, watching the eastern curve with growing unease. The temperature had dropped to 42 degrees, yet something was terribly wrong with the world around him. Graves rubbed his eyes, certain that fatigue was playing tricks on his vision. The 11:30 arrival was pulling into Platform 1, its familiar black locomotive cutting through the fog with mechanical precision. But as he turned his head toward the eastern approach, his blood ran cold. The same train was still rounding the curve, approaching the station with identical speed and rhythm. Two trains, identical in every detail, existing in the same moment. "Sweet Mary and Joseph," Graves whispered, his hands trembling as he gripped his lantern. The metal handle felt ice-cold despite the warmth of his palms. He blinked hard, shook his head, and looked again. Both trains remained, one stationary at the platform, passengers already disembarking, while the other continued its impossible approach from the east. The steam rising from the rails caught his attention next. Despite the westward wind that had been blowing steadily all morning, the white vapors twisted and curled eastward, defying every natural law Graves had observed in his 20 years of railway service. The patterns seemed almost deliberate, forming shapes that reminded him of letters or symbols before dissolving into chaos. Inside the station house, telegraph operator Samuel Millfield sat hunched over his Morse key, his usually steady hands now shaking with confusion. The brass instrument had been tapping out messages on its own for the past hour, sending departure confirmations for trains that his meticulously kept logbook showed had not yet arrived. Each tap echoed through the small room with an odd rhythm that made his skin crawl. "This cannot be right," Millfield muttered, checking his pocket watch against the station's brass pendulum clock. The timepiece had been installed just 3 months prior, a pride of the railway company, but now it chimed at intervals that made no earthly sense. 12 chimes at 10 o'clock, 7 chimes at half-past, and now, as he watched in growing horror, it struck 19 times in succession. The Morse key continued its ghostly communication, and Millfield found himself unconsciously following its pattern with his finger on the desk. The rhythm was familiar, yet completely wrong, like hearing a favorite song played backward. Each tap seemed to resonate not just in the air, but deep in his chest, matching no heartbeat he had ever felt. At the ticket window, station clerk Henry Patterson stared at a handful of ticket stubs that defied explanation. Passengers had somehow purchased passage to Platform 13, though Millbrook Station possessed only 4 platforms. The ink on these impossible tickets seemed to shift and change as morning sunlight filtered through the fog-stained windows, transforming from deep black to an unsettling shade of copper. Patterson held one of the stubs up to the light, watching the text rearrange itself before his eyes. The destination remained constant, but the departure time seemed to flutter between numbers that had no meaning in any system of timekeeping he knew. His hands shook as he placed the tickets in his cash drawer, certain that he was losing his mind. The fog outside grew thicker, pressing against the station windows like searching fingers. Through the murky air, the outline of trains moved with purpose that seemed independent of any schedule or logic. Whistle blasts echoed from directions where no tracks existed, and the sound of wheels on rails came from above, as if locomotives were somehow traveling through the sky itself. Engineer Thomas Whitmore approached the station in his locomotive, the familiar weight of the throttle solid beneath his experienced hand. He had made this run countless times, knew every curve and gradient by heart, yet something felt fundamentally wrong about this particular morning. The fog seemed to part before his train with reluctance, and the rails beneath him hummed with a frequency that made his teeth ache. As he prepared to announce his arrival with the customary whistle blast, Whitmore froze. The sound he was about to make was already echoing from the tunnels ahead, identical in pitch and duration. His hand hadn't yet pulled the cord, but somehow his whistle was calling out from the darkness beyond the station. The echo preceded the action, defying every principle of cause and effect he had ever known. Whitmore leaned out of his cab, squinting through the fog at the platform ahead. What he saw made his heart hammer against his ribs with primal terror. His train's shadow stretched across the platform, dark and well-defined despite the diffused light of the fog-shrouded morning. But his locomotive was still 3 minutes away from the station, still approaching through the eastern curve. The shadow moved independently, following the contours of a train that had not yet arrived, cast by a sun that seemed to shine from multiple directions at once. Whitmore watched, paralyzed by the impossibility of what he witnessed, as his own silhouette gestured from the shadow cab while he sat motionless in his actual locomotive. I watched my train's shadow arrive 3 minutes before my train did. Professor Helena Blackwood stepped off the morning train at Millbrook Station, her leather satchel heavy with the weight of scientific precision. The chronometer apparatus clinked softly against the brass fittings as he adjusted his grip, dark eyes scanning the platform with the methodical gaze of a man who measured time itself. October 20th, 1873, had dawned crisp and clear, but something in the air felt wrong, a subtle wrongness that made his pocket watch tick with unusual urgency. The station master, a portly man named Jenkins, approached with visible relief etched across his weathered face. "Professor Blackwood, thank God you've come," Jenkins said, wringing his hands nervously. "The situation has grown worse since we telegraphed your institute." "Much worse." Helena nodded grimly, setting down his apparatus with practiced care. The brass chronometer gleamed in the morning light, its multiple dials and gauges designed to detect the slightest temporal irregularities. "Show me to the location where the disturbances are strongest," he commanded, his voice carrying the authority of a man who had spent decades studying the mysteries of time. As they walked toward the station's central platform, Helena began his preliminary measurements. The chronometer's needles danced wildly, their erratic movements confirming his worst suspicions. 14 minutes. That was the differential he recorded between the station's clocks and his precision instruments. 14 minutes of time that seemed to exist in some impossible space between past and future. "It started small," Jenkins explained, his voice dropping to a whisper as they passed a group of railway workers. "Just a few seconds here and there. But now—" He gestured helplessly at the great station clock, its hands frozen at precisely 3:17. That clock stopped 3 days ago, yet passengers still arrive according to its time. Trains that left yesterday pull into platforms before they departed. The weight of the revelation settled heavily on Helena's shoulders. He had encountered temporal anomalies before, minor fluctuations in his laboratory, brief moments where causality seemed to stutter, but nothing approaching this magnitude. The implications were staggering, threatening to upend everything science understood about the nature of time itself. At Millbrook Infirmary, Dr. Margaret Whitmore led Helena through the ward dedicated to railway staff. 17 men lay in neat rows, their eyes unfocused and distant, as if seeing events that had not yet occurred or remembering futures that might never be. "Chronological vertigo," Dr. Whitmore explained, her voice tight with professional concern. "They describe feeling time move backward, watching their own actions reverse like water flowing uphill." Helena examined each patient carefully, noting how they all worked at or near the station. One man, a conductor named Thomas, grabbed Helena's sleeve with surprising strength. "I saw myself die yesterday," Thomas whispered, his eyes wide with terror. "Fell under the 4:15 express. But here I am, alive, watching it happen again and again. The train comes, I fall, I die, then I'm standing on the platform again, waiting for it to happen." The professor's hands trembled slightly as he recorded these accounts. Each testimony painted the same impossible picture: time flowing in circles, cause following effect, futures bleeding into the present like watercolors in rain. Meanwhile, Dr. Ashford's optical laboratory had become a battleground between science and impossibility. The respected physicist hunched over Harwick's photograph, his spectroscope casting rainbow fragments across the darkened room. "Look at this," he muttered, beckoning Helena closer. "The shadows fall northeast when the sun was documented as being in the southwest position. It's as if the photograph was taken in a world where physics operates in reverse." The spectrographic analysis proved even more disturbing. The clock face in the image showed metallic signatures completely inconsistent with bronze, elements that wouldn't be discovered for another decade, arranged in patterns that defied current understanding of metallurgy. "It's as if someone photographed an object from the future," Dr. Ashford concluded, his normally steady voice cracking under the weight of impossibility. In the depths of government archives, a sealed letter from the Railway Inspector General waited like a time bomb of official acknowledgement. Though it wouldn't be opened until 1952, its contents already cast shadows backward through time. The letter, written in the careful script of bureaucratic necessity, would eventually acknowledge phenomena beyond current scientific understanding and recommend the immediate suspension of all scientific inquiry into the Millbrook station incidents. Museum curator James Fairfax worked through the night, cataloging photograph after photograph that defied rational explanation. 13 additional images had surfaced from various stations across the country, each capturing impossible moments where time seemed to stutter and reverse. Steam dissipated into engines rather than emerging from them. Passengers boarded trains that had already departed, their faces serene as they stepped into empty air. In one particularly disturbing image, a clock's hands moved counterclockwise while people walked backward down the platform, their clothes and hair flowing against gravity's pull. "Each photograph tells the same story," Fairfax explained to Helena, spreading the images across his examination table like tarot cards predicting doom. "Time isn't just broken here, it's flowing in the wrong direction entirely." The British Geological Survey's findings provided the final piece of an increasingly terrifying puzzle. Magnetic anomalies beneath the station corresponded exactly to the times of greatest chronological disturbance, creating patterns that resembled nothing so much as ripples spreading backward through the Earth itself. The underground magnetic field pulsed with a rhythm that matched the reversed tick of the station's broken clocks. Helena stood in the center of the platform as evening approached, surrounded by instruments that confirmed what human senses desperately wanted to deny. The chronometer's readings grew more erratic with each passing moment, its needles spinning in directions that shouldn't exist. Workers moved around him like ghosts, their actions sometimes preceding their intentions, their words occasionally emerging as echoes before being spoken. The professor closed his eyes, feeling the weight of scientific impossibility pressing down upon him like a physical force. Everything his instruments measured, every testimony he recorded, every photograph he examined pointed to the same inescapable conclusion. The very foundation of temporal reality had cracked beneath Millbrook Station, allowing past and future to bleed together in ways that transformed observation into nightmare. As darkness fell and the station's gas lamps flickered to life, Helena opened his eyes and spoke the words that would haunt him for the rest of his days. His voice carried across the platform with the weight of absolute certainty, each word measured and precise despite the chaos surrounding him. Every instrument confirmed what human senses denied. Time was flowing backwards. Disclaimer: the story you just watched is fictional. It explores themes of mystery, time, and the eerie distortions hidden within history's relics. Its purpose is to raise awareness, spark curiosity, and inspire reflection on the unexplained moments that blur the line between fact and folklore.